Okay, so welcome everyone to our second webinar of the 2023-2024 season. Tonight we are going to discuss about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, so I would like to spend a couple of words on that. When we decided to organize this event about 1 month ago, we knew it was going to be challenging. We knew it was going to be tough for everybody that is connected directly or indirectly with the situation. For our organization, for our speakers, for the audience. But at the same time, we had a conversation on this, and we understood that at a time of polarization and extremism, it is our duty as an organization, it is what we stand for, to create a safe space for discussion, to create a space for mutual understanding, and for a healthy conversation. And so we decided to go ahead and plan this event, not only to discuss what's happening, but also to discuss the future, because sooner or later, and we hope as soon as possible, this situation will end, and then we will have another future. We will have changes, we will have a different situation. And so we would like to understand that, to understand what will happen, to envision the future. And another thing I would like to say is that 1 year ago, I think at this time, we held another webinar on the Russian-Ukrainian war, and that was also very challenging. We had people connecting from Moscow, we had people connecting from Kiev, but in the end, it was a very successful event, and we all felt it was an enriching experience. So we hope to do the same with this debate. And again, we understand what's happening. It's a source of pain, it's a source of frustration, of anger for everyone. But this is the space to have that conversation and to feel protected, to exchange a different opinion. And it's okay if they're different. It's okay if we think differently, as long as we express that with respect. So we're going to have an initial discussion for 40 minutes among our guests, which I will introduce now. And then we will start the Q&A session. So everybody from the public can just jump in and interact with our guests. There is another thing I would like to say before I start my round of introduction. And I know Michele, our director, would like to add something in this respect. We really, when we talked about organizing this event, we also thought it would be very enriching to have people from different perspectives, and so to have representatives from the Palestinian community and from the Israeli community. And so we reached out to each side to try to have somebody to speak on the behalf of the respective side. But unfortunately for the Palestinian community, that was not possible. And I know many of you were involved in this up until today, up until a few hours ago. We were still trying to reach out. We probably contacted about 8 people, and some of them were we totally understand that, and we respect that. Some of them just felt the topic is too sensitive, and they didn't feel they would have the emotional strength to participate. And again, we completely understand that. Other people were more confrontational, and they just wouldn't see the point of having this kind of debate. They just wouldn't understand the reason. But again, I want to thank many of you as well that were involved in trying to find this perspective as well. We really tried, and unfortunately we didn't succeed. Michele, I know you want to add something in this respect.
Thank you, Carlotta. Yeah, we, as you were saying, and you said it marvelously, whilst we do respect pain and the tragedy which is unfolding, at the same time, we could not picture an event without having both sides. Even though we didn't want these sides to act in a confrontational way, because it's not the point. We could go out there and we could root for Israel or root for the Palestinian cause and end up yelling at each other and create even more controversy, which arguably in this moment, this is not something warranted. It's not something that we need. And so without any type of presumptuousness, not only do we refrain from addressing this very arrogantly, come to our event and peace will be achieved. No, that is obviously very stupid and very arrogant. So we don't have that type of presumptuousness. But at the same time, as you were saying, Carlotta, sooner or later, this will end. And therefore, so what? What are we going to do? What are we going to see? And this was the reason why we desperately wanted to reach some Palestinian minds. In one case, a doctor, right? So like a very, very educated person, a person who I love and deeply respect, said that this issue was it was too emotional because he has family in Gaza, and he appreciated and he really wanted it, but he just didn't have the personal strength to do that, and I absolutely respect it. But unfortunately, as you did mention, as you do recall, all the other people, and I myself have contacted probably 10 or something like this, like even on my own. They didn't see the point. They attacked me, got called names, blah, 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 right? And so, at that point, actually, it opens up the discussion, but I will share these points at the very end of the webinar. But thank you, Carlotta, for all of you watching now or later on. Carlotta has been the driver behind this whole event. And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you, because I know it was incredibly uncomfortable and very challenging. And a deep thank you to each and every one of you in the audience, particularly our guests from Israel and elsewhere who are joining us tonight. Let's have a beautiful event. Carlotta, back to you.
Thank you so much, Michele. I join Michele in thanking all of you for being here. This would not have been possible without all of you. So I will just start giving a brief round of introduction, starting from Dr. Magen Inon. Magen, I've already said that, I'll repeat that again. I think we can't express enough with words how grateful we are for your presence tonight. Dr. Magen Inon is an Israeli educator currently based in London. He lost his parents during the October 7th attacks. And he wrote a beautiful article on The Guardian, which I read about a month ago. And back then I didn't know I was gonna meet you tonight. And I found that a very powerful article. And I think the message you are trying to convey with your words stands at the core of what we are trying to do tonight. And he also wrote another article on the Times, and he has been interviewed by many publications, by TV programs and radio programs. So thank you for being here, Magen.
Thank you.
And then moving on to Omri Brinner. He's one of our oldest members at ITSS and a researcher in the Middle East team. He's also a lecturer and a blogger, and his major focus is, of course, Middle Eastern politics, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, terror financing, and security in the region. Thank you so much for being here, Omri. And then moving to another member of the Middle East team, Chantal Elisabeth Hohe. She's currently based in Cairo and studying at her Master in International Relations at the University of Frankfurt. And among her interests are extremism, radicalization, and security, geographically focused on the Middle East. So thank you so much, Chantal, for being here today and bringing the Egyptian perspective to the table. And then, of course, last but not least, our president, Michele Groppi, who is also a lecturer at King's College London and who created ITSS Verona with the idea of making the study of security more international, and considering that, as you said before, we are more than 50 nationalities in ITSS and we have people in Canada and Australia. You are doing quite well with that goal. So thank you for being here, Michele, as a speaker tonight and not only as a president. And then I would like to move on with the first question. As I said before, we're going to have about 40 minutes for our debate between our guests, and then we will open the Q&A session so each of you can engage and ask questions. So Magen, I would like to start with your article, the one I was mentioning before. For those that didn't read it, I just would like to ask you to tell your story and also to talk about your message for those that didn't have a chance to learn about it.
Okay, so briefly, just about my parents. My parents lived in the nearest Israeli village to the Gaza Strip. It's right on the border. The nearest house is less than 100 meters from the border. And between my parents' village and the border, because it's so close, there's a very high wall. It's about 8 meters above ground. So it's something like 4 times the Berlin Wall, if you want to imagine. And on Saturday morning, terrorists attacked all across the Gaza border, but to my parents' village, because there's such a high concrete wall, they used motorized parachutes to fly over the wall and landed. There weren't many of them. We think less than 10. They landed in the village and started going house to house, basically. And my parents' house was hit by an RPG, most likely. And because it's partly a wooden house, it burned down completely with my parents in it. So we have some consolation that in their case, it was fast and they were together. That day, 20 other people in the village were murdered. Some of them are kind of the village small security, civilian security members. And it's this is just one village out of the many that were attacked. And I mean, you probably read enough about some of what happened that day. So we in Jewish tradition, usually after a funeral, you kind of sit at one place for a week to give people the opportunity to come and pay their condolences. So the Sunday after, I was already in Israel, where I met my siblings. I'm the youngest of 5. I met my siblings, and then we many people came to us, and my family has good links with the Arab and Bedouin communities in Israel. And so we had many of our friends from those communities join us as well. And it was a very, as you can imagine, very sad and very emotional week. But then at the last day, when we sat together, my brother and 3 sisters, we kind of talked about, okay, what's coming next. And one of the topics on the agenda was what kind of message we want to send out, because we figured we're going to get a lot of media attention. And together we decided that we want to bring about a message of that continues the legacy of my parents, which is, we kind of the vision we want for the area is the way they lived. And we thought revenge is not the answer, and we want to send a message of hope and solidarity. And that's the message I tried to convey in that op-ed in The Guardian. And following that piece, I was contacted by many individuals and quite a few organizations who kind of felt that that's the message they want to push across media and the public and politicians. So been quite busy since. It's luckily I quit my job like 3 months ago, so I have the time. But it's every day. It's there's quite a few, some interviews and some political lobbying, where we're trying to not only give that message out, but also see, okay, what do we want the future to look like, and trying to help organizations that are working in that direction, and maybe it's trying to help politicians to move in that direction. I can say a bit more about that. It depends about what you guys are curious.
No, of course, we will be very curious about that, because as I was discussing with Omri also this week, when we look at we listen to the media, we mostly learn about the Israeli government policies and what's happening at the moment in Gaza, but we learn very little about these grassroots movements. We don't learn much about, for example, Israeli and Palestinian people working together, as you are doing, to to achieve a ceasefire, to achieve peace. And so I would like to ask you about this different reality that we don't hear much about, and also what are the challenges and how are you working together, if you see any improvements?
So definitely there's, maybe I'll divide it into three. There's cross-border activities, so working with Palestinians who live in the West Bank, mostly. There's work between Israeli-Palestinians, so Palestinians who have an Israeli citizenship, sometimes called Israeli Arabs, and Jews living in Israel. And there's also quite a lot of work here in the community in London, where tensions are very high between Muslims and Jews. So starting with the first, cross-border. So today I met, over the last 2 days, I met with an organization called the Parents Circle. And it's people like me who lost loved ones in the conflict, both Jews, Israelis, and Palestinians, Muslims and Christians. And it's an organization that's been active for, I think, at least 2 decades. They have 700 families, and they do a variety of things, from like summer camp for the younger members of, and also public speaking, and the idea is to have most of the activities to have a partner. So I would do it with another Palestinian who lost someone in the conflict, and then we'll speak together. And it's quite a powerful moment, because people actually shut up and listen. And you know, when my Palestinian partner can condemn the violence, you know, done by Hamas or another terrorist organization, and when I can condemn, let's say, settler violence, and then it just becomes a quite a powerful moment where, you know, it gets people to think. So at the moment, the Israeli government specifically is trying to get this organization, just as an example, trying to bar them from going into schools, etc. This is something that started before October 7th with the quite extreme government Israel has at the moment. But this is an organization that's quite active, and I think would be quite active once the fighting is over. I think now, as the fighting continues, it's very hard to do anything. But today, for example, I met with one of their like kind of leading figures, and we met with parliament members here in London, and also trying to get support for those kinds of activities. So this is cross-border. And then in Israel, there's quite interesting movements or organizations that, one of the kind of rays of light maybe in this is that the Arab Israeli or Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, their leaders, but also as a public, made a decision that they are not taking Hamas's side this time in any way. So we haven't seen any violence between Arabs and Israelis, and I'm talking within the borders of the 67 borders of Israel. And even in polling, it shows that they really distance themselves from the Hamas attack. And there's also organizations on the ground that are trying to kind of build solidarity between Arabs, mostly Muslims, but also Christians and Jews. One such organization is called Standing Together. And they do things like, you know, there's a lot of Arabs in the Israeli health system, so nurses and doctors. And so if one of them is being abused, then they can call that organization and get support. They're also doing events and some all kinds of sending groups of people to places where they feel some tension, or they might even send gifts to someone who was harmed, and so trying to change the dynamics there. So this is within Israel, and here in London, I'll give an example of something that I was very involved in. I think that there's a really sense where the moderate voice here is not being heard. You hear, even in the very big pro-Palestine demonstrations, you only hear about the most extreme voices in those demonstrations, and sometimes also from like the pro-Israeli camp, you mostly hear the most extreme voices in that camp. And so someone who reached out to me, his name is Brendan Cox. He's the husband of Jo Cox, who was murdered. She was an MP who was murdered in 2016 around the Brexit campaign. So he reached out to me, and he has this organization that is trying to kind of deal with victims of terror and try to bring moderate voices and deal with extremism. And together with him and his organization and some other organizations, we've organized a vigil here in London. So I spoke. There was Hamza Awawde, who's a Palestinian from Ramallah, was here, and he spoke. And we had religious leaders. It sounds like a joke, but we had a rabbi, an imam, and a priest, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So quite high-profile religious leaders, and everyone together, calling for solidarity and humanity, and so just trying and give that voice some space. And this got a lot of media attention, which I'm still struggling to follow every media outlet that wants to speak to me. So though I think this is not trying to keep it short, but this is I think what is some of the more hopeful things that are happening on the ground. But statistically, this is it's quite small. But we hope we can that this is a movement that is maybe can grow a bit further, and I can say why I think we might have an opportunity coming in the next year or so, but maybe that's for the next question.
Thank you so much, Magen. Exactly, this is what we were saying earlier. The problem is that we mostly talk about extremist idea. We never focus on who's more moderate, who's actually looking for that dialogue. I would like just to ask you one more question before I move to the next chapter. I would like to ask you, I know it's perhaps a very complex question, but when you all sit together and discuss, how would you envision a future when we talk about what's going to happen next? What do you see for the future?
I think at the moment, uncertainty, the level of uncertainty, and once the fight, as long as the fighting continues, it's very hard to imagine anything. Whatever comes, it must be based on some kind of common humanity. And I'm not sure if it's something that would come top down with pressure of the international community, or more something that might be maybe both a bottom up movement. I was also at the European Parliament on Thursday, and I think there something that made sense to them is talking in terms of the Ireland peace process. That they spent, one of the things I told the EU members of Parliament is that they need to kind of open their wallets, and they spent billions on the Irish peace process, and they're basically are not spending anything on the Israel-Palestine conflict at the moment. And so I think those organizations I'm talking about are really craving for funding. And if you think of the funding Hamas is getting, and without comparing, but also the funding that the settlement movement is getting, then you realize what are the forces that are supporting these extreme ideologies, and then in a sense no one is funding the moderates. And so I think that's one of the things that clear to me that needs to happen. And again, ultimately, you guys have studied it more than me. Ultimately, we'll have peace. It's a question if it's going to take 5 or 50 or 500 years, and how many people are going to die along the way. So I hope we can make it sooner than later. But ultimately, conflicts get some kind of a resolution at some point.
Thank you, Magen. Yes, I think financial support for these kind of groups is a very good point, especially as you said, when we have finances for other kind of groups, it's something that we really need at the moment. Thank you so much, Magen. I will move to the next question, but we will definitely come back to you later in the Q&A session. Omri, as you know, I have a quote for you because we've been discussing about what's coming next, and we've said that we know that after October 7, something will change, but it's very hard to say what will change. And so there is a quote from Nidal Fokaha, the Director General of a non-profit group based in Ramallah. And what he says is that the recent events only prompt us all to be more creative and more innovative on a two-state solution. So also connecting to what Magen was saying, what do you envision for the future, and what's your opinion on a two-state solution?
Thank you, Carlotta, and thank you, Magen. I think that Nidal hits the nail on the head, but he places the nail in the wrong place. So I'll divide his quote into 2 parts. First, I will talk about all of us, needing to be more creative and more innovative. And Magen just a minute ago mentioned the word imagination. And I'll connect it even further to a book about the greater Middle East that was published recently by Robert Kaplan from FPRI. And he talks there about the role of imagination in geopolitics. That you cannot move forward without imagination. And when you have a problem and you don't use your imagination to solve it, and I'm using the word imagination, and it's the same being innovative and creative, but I'm using the word imagination. So without imagination, moving forward is basically meaningless, and it actually creates more problems than what we have at the moment. So what are we imagining? I'll start from the end. Obviously, I don't have a solution, right? Obviously, I don't have an sort of an installment or arrangement that says this is the best plan, and we have to move towards that plan, and nothing else will work. I don't have that, and no one really has that. I mean, to the level that Israel doesn't know what's going to happen after the war if it achieves its objectives in Gaza. So there's already a big lack of imagination there. But hearing top officials from the US, from the EU, from the UN, talking about a two-state solution, the same solution that they were talking about for the past 30 years that hasn't worked. And this is where I'm referring to the second part of Nidal's sentence, is an extreme lack of imagination. Because, and I will explain immediately why I don't believe a two-state solution is viable at the moment. Because what hasn't worked for 30 years and has brought us to where we are right now is it was okay to give it a chance. I completely agree with that, and that was using imagination, but that hasn't worked, and that has led us to where we are at the moment, with a lot of what we call peace spoiling efforts, both from the Palestinian side and from the Israeli side. I mean, we can go back to 1995 with the assassination of the Israeli prime minister that is purely lone wolf terrorism, a peace-spoiling act that completely derailed the peace process between Israel and Palestine. And then we can go to Hamas's terror attacks throughout the years, from the mid-90s through the second Intifada, early 2000s, and the attack on October 7th. That is all peace-spoiling actions. Now, why I think that we need to imagine a new solution rather than a two-stage solution. First of all, I don't think, and obviously I'm not alone in this, that Israel would agree anytime in the near future to have a Palestinian state next to it. No Israeli leader, not the very, very poor leadership that Israel has at the moment, nor its alternatives in Israeli politics. No Israeli leader will agree to a Palestinian state next to Israel. And without some sort of Israeli cooperation in this process, this isn't going to happen, right? No one is going to force a Palestinian state upon Israel, because it's just, Israel basically controls the Palestinian territories. So that obviously has to be with Israeli approval. Second, and we need to put the cards on the table and be honest with ourselves. Palestinian society today, from bottom up and from top down, is not ready to conduct a sustainable and prosperous state. They don't have territorial cohesion. I'm not even talking about the separation between the West Bank and Gaza. I'm talking even within the West Bank and the Israeli settlements, enclaves there. I mean, you can't have Palestinian state and Israeli enclaves within the Palestinian state. That won't happen. There's no agreed upon leadership with public support and legitimacy. The Palestinians hadn't had elections since 2005, and that brought up about Hamas's rule. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, led by Fatah, isn't holding elections because it knows that if it will hold elections, then Hamas will also win in the West Bank. That's a known fact. There are no functioning institutions in the Palestinian Authority, and Israel is much to blame for it, but not only, but that is the reality. It doesn't even matter whose fault it is. The economy is almost non-existent. They don't have a currency. There is extreme poverty and so on. So what we're looking at, even if there is a Palestinian state tomorrow, in a year time, we're talking about a struggling state. And that is not even going into the relations with Israel. So we need to imagine something else. Now, again, I'll return to the beginning. And in the beginning, I talked about the end. I don't have a solution. I don't have an arrangement. No one really has an arrangement right now. But there is a need to be creative, to be innovative, and to use our imagination. Because without this process of thinking, we're not going to get anywhere promising. And this can't be done only by the Palestinians. It needs to be done also by the international community, and it needs to be done also by the Israelis. Now, when I say also by the Israelis, and of course, the three need to cooperate. When I say also by the Israelis, what I mean is this. Israel, as we see it today, will not be the same in 10 years or in 20 years. It just won't. And this war is sort of the tipping point in this process. And Israelis need to start imagining something else, because we know it will change. Israel will change whether you like it or not. The borders will change. The population will change. There's demographic changes in Israel. the way it is right now is not sustainable. So we need to be honest with ourselves as Israelis, or Israelis need to be honest with themselves, and they need to say, look, we need to start imagining a different Israel, because what we have right now is going to change, and we rather control that change rather than that change they control us. So there needs to be a lot of thinking. I don't think that the two-state solution is viable at the moment. I'm not saying that it won't be viable in 10 years' time, but at the moment, there's even no point of talking about a two-state solution. But it doesn't mean that there isn't another solution. There isn't another solution that is good for both peoples. So even though the tone of my things might be pessimistic, it doesn't have to be, right? Because this might be a very good opportunity to come up with something else, because what we've had thus far in front of us hasn't worked, and to a large extent has led us to where we are right now. Not because of lack of good intentions, also that, but because of spoilers, of people who wanted to ruin that vision. So we need to come up with something that has a wider consensus. Magen earlier referred to basic humanity as the common ground. If we can get that across, then that would be amazing. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but we need to look at something with a wider consensus. And there must be a more people-to-people kind of work like Magen is doing, because the leadership on both sides is just not good enough. On the Palestinian side, it's not good enough. On the Israeli side, it's not good enough. And even let's say that after the war, the leadership changes. Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, late 80s, who's going to inherit the Palestinian Authority? Who's going to be the next leader? Is he going to be elected through democratic elections? And then we might see Hamas, or is he going to appoint someone as his leader? And if he appoints someone as his leader, is that not forcing someone on the Palestinian people, and on everyone really? And the alternative to the Israeli leadership at the moment isn't good enough either. So we're stuck at this point at the moment. And again, I'll refer to what Magen said. As long as there's fighting, there's little room to maneuver. But it doesn't mean that we can't start the process of imagining something different, something better. So I believe there is hope. I believe there is a goodwill, even if I only want to believe that there is goodwill. That's a place to start from. But we need to imagine something else. We need to be more creative and more innovative, as Nidal said.
Thank you so much, Omri. Maybe going back to what Magen was saying earlier, maybe the groups he was talking about, where you have a imam working next to side by side with a rabbi, can become a source of that imagination. And I would like to ask you another question, also related to your work, because you also focus on the wider Middle East. So talking about the wider Middle East, how do you think the different actors can play a role in this scenario? And I'm mostly focusing on regional actors like Saudi Arabia and Iran, which are more involved in the situation.
Right, thanks. So I think that we'll differentiate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I'll first refer to the Saudi sort of coalition, and then to the Iranian coalition or axis of resistance, as they call it. If we're looking about Saudi Arabia specifically, and maybe we can add the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, to this package. I think that their involvement will come into play at a later stage, not right now while there is fighting ongoing and where peace is more likely to fail rather than succeed, right? So I don't think that neither Saudi Arabia or the UAE will get their hands dirty in trying to reach a ceasefire and to lead both parties to the negotiation table, because that is more likely to fail if we're honest with ourselves. And they don't want to be the image of the failure. Rather, they will let other people, other sides, it can be either the US or Qatar, which is not a favorite of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, or the European Union, sort of lead the negotiation and try to get the two sides out of this. And if they are successful, then that's when Saudi Arabia and the UAE will come into play. Obviously, mostly with money and guarantees of sustaining the economy of, let's say, a Palestinian state, for that matter. So if it's rebuilding Gaza, if it's supporting the Palestinian Authority, whatever it may be at that stage in the West Bank, and coming up with something more sustainable. Because earlier I was talking about the lack of institutionalized economy for the Palestinians and institutions in general. So you can't run a society like that, a successful society. With Saudi and Emirati money, it is more likely, and with less corruption on the Palestinian leadership side, it is more likely that this will be successful. So that's how I see the Saudi and Emirati involvement. I'll say one more thing. There is an idea out there that I've mentioned it before in my ITSS classes during the summer school and the winter school, and in lectures I give through the ITSS. There is an idea out there about a confederation between the Israelis, the Palestinians, and even the Jordanians. So it's a confederation of the three countries, and each country still has its own government and makes decisions for itself, but there's much more cooperation between the three, and the common ideas between the three are much wider than they are today. This idea has been floating around for a while, and it's still a little bit too far to really grasp, but referring to what I said earlier, it's an exercise of imagining something else. So that's a possibility. If that confederation comes about, I believe that it can be successful under a Saudi and American patronship or whatever, if it's American guarantees and Saudi money, to simplify things. Now, talking about Iran has a completely opposite interest than Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia wants, and again, Saudi Arabia as the representative of this coalition and Iran as the representative of the other, if Saudi Arabia wants sustainable solutions, it wants a stable state of affairs, Iran wants exactly the opposite. Iran wants to destabilize the region. So even if Iran by proxy gets a foothold in rebuilding Gaza and the Palestinian Authority altogether, and Iran does have influence over Palestinian factions, it finances the PIJ, it finances Hamas, it has relations in the West Bank. But even if it is able to achieve a more official sort of role in the building of the next Palestinian, whatever it may be, entity, then it will be limited. It will be limited because it's very obvious to all actors involved what Iran's interests are. so where the money will go. So if, as we said, if Saudi Arabia wants to stabilize the region, Iran wants to destabilize the region, and to send its proxies to these pockets of instability and cause more and more instability. That's how I see things in terms of Iranian involvement in the future of the Palestinian issue. Now, we can't talk about Iran without talking about Hezbollah when we talk about Israel. And in the Middle East, while we don't have any certainties, there are some certainties, for lack of a better word. First is that Iran will gain nuclear weapons. Iran will become a nuclear military power. I mean, that's inevitable. I have a theory that Iran might already be, or might already have nuclear capabilities, but it's sort of like a known secret, and that isn't being spoken about. And that is one reason why we haven't seen a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah. And even if I'm wrong, then Iran will become a nuclear power, and that changes everything. And that the second certainty that goes hand in hand with the fact that Iran will definitely become a nuclear military power is that it is most likely that there will be a war between Israel and Hezbollah at some point. It can be tomorrow, and it can be in 5 years, and it can be in 10 years. But it's very, very unlikely that we will never see a war between Israel and Hezbollah, right? It is more likely that there will be a war between these two forces. And the question is whether this war is going to happen before Iran becomes nuclear or after. Because if it happens after, then we're talking about a completely different story than if this war happens while Iran is still not a nuclear actor. Now, I, along with others, don't believe that Iran will, even if it does have nuclear capabilities, will bomb Israel with a nuclear bomb. But the way Israelis perceive the Iranian regime is that it's not a completely rational regime. And therefore they assume that they might decide to bomb Israel with a nuclear bomb. And the way of thinking, the scenarios that are possible in that certain scenario that Iran might attack Israel with nuclear weapons, when it does gain that capability, they will determine, I believe, what happens next with Hezbollah. And I hate saying it. I honestly hate saying it, but it might be in Israel's interest to open a war with Hezbollah before Iran becomes nuclear, rather than fight with Hezbollah in 10 years' time, let's say, when Iran is already a nuclear power. Even though Israel's nuclear arsenal is much bigger than what Iran will have in a few years' time, the likelihood, or at least the perception of the likelihood that Iran will attack Israel rather than the other way around with nuclear weapons is higher. So it might be in Israel's interest to start a war. And again, I hate saying it, but we have to be honest with ourselves. And sometimes honesty is it's just not the prettiest, and it's not the sweetest, but it is what it is.
Thank you very much, Omri, for these insights. Thank you. And you mentioned before a confederation in which one of the members would be Jordan. So that takes us to Chantal, because she has been researching the role of Jordan and also the role of Egypt, where she's based, in the negotiating process, or how they could play a role in that imagination you were talking about. So Chantal, back to you. I would like to ask you to discuss the role of Jordan and Egypt, which are also two important actors in the region.
Yes, thank you very much for passing on to me. Just one quick disclaimer. I asked for a room. They gave me a cubicle without walls, so I'm just hoping that you can all hear me and that there's not going to be any distractions in the background.
I will hear you.
Okay, perfect. So as I am based in Cairo, my focus point is somewhat Egypt. But since we were talking about a confederation, let's start with Jordan real quick. So Egypt and Jordan are the both states that are neighboring to Israel, that are not Lebanon, where Omri has touched on Hezbollah, and we're not gonna see any attempts at making peace from that side. So let us touch on Jordan. Jordan has its own particular relationship with Israel and with the conflict at large. Like Egypt, it has a peace treaty with Israel since 1994. So there are some rapprochement achievements that have been taken place in the past, but during the current war, it has taken a stronger stance, establishing red lines, saying, okay, we don't want an influx of refugees coming from the West Bank or from Gaza, because we have already been struggling with the refugees that we are taking care of. And it has been a little bit more vocal and more visible. Also, the foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, saying that all options are on the table if Israel crosses a red line. However, Jordan is a key actor in a possible post-war scenario because of the huge Jordanian population that is of Palestinian descent. This is a huge point that we should not forget and that we should always include. So Jordan is very much in favor of establishing a permanent ceasefire, finding a solution. However, I'm a bit hesitant with the notion of imagination here, because I feel like even though we need, of course, we need to imagine something new, there's always values and interests that are governing maybe over the imagination, which I find very sad, but which is always something we need to consider. So I'm sorry, I have been disrupted by I'm just gonna continue. I'm very sorry. So I was saying that Jordan is a key player in the negotiation process, also because it has leverage over the UK and the US, because Jordan needs to remain an island of stability. And if we use this factor, we can see that maybe a confederation would be a sustainable solution, even though, as I said, it's not very feasible at the current moment, because values and interests that are broader than this and security concerns that are broader than this need to be resolved first. And I think it's a really long shot trying to establish a confederation, especially since Jordan, as the other Arab states, has taken a very strong pro-Palestinian stance and has been pushing for Israel to stop its campaign. So this is my take on Jordan. And as I said, I'm based in Egypt, I'm based in Cairo, so this is more of my focal point. So I'd be happy to have Omri also react to what I said about Jordan. But first, I will take some time to talk about Egypt. So Egypt and Israel have also had a peace agreement since 1978 after the October War. So for 45 years, we have had peace between the two states. And this, of course, plays into the foreign policy considerations of Egypt. And there's also an energy dependency between Egypt and Israel, where Egypt is currently dependent on Israeli gas deliveries, which of course does not make the situation less complicated. And another complicating factor is that Egyptians, the population, not the government, or more than the government, so to say, have historically been very strongly aligned with the Palestinian cause. They have a shared Arab nationalist sentiment that has been present for as long as we can think, so to say, especially during Nasser and everything that came after. And both these circumstances, of course, represent crucial factors influencing the policy of the current president of Egypt in this conflict, because he has to balance domestic and foreign factors. Domestically, Egypt is suffering its worst economic crisis since 60 years. And this is accompanied, of course, by a high level of dissatisfaction among the population, just a little more than a decade after the Arab Spring. So this is something we need to consider. This is something that Egypt needs to consider when going into a possible post-war negotiation process, of course, because we saw in 2011 what popular dissent can do, and these memories are still very much present in the minds of the government, especially since today the trust and in the government and in its ability to lead the country domestically into a future of prosperity and economic growth that was promised is fading. So we have a domestic factor that weighs very, very strongly in this process, especially also with the elections that are now upcoming, prompting Sisi, of course, to be extra careful with what he does on the foreign policy parquet. So Egypt is important in this conflict because of Rafah. That is one factor. Rafah, the border crossing, of course, that probably everyone knows about because it has been on the news almost every day, since Egypt is the only state that is bordering Gaza and thus controls one side of the lifeline to the Gazan population, and is also responsible for coordinating the humanitarian aid that's not only coming from Egypt, but from the whole world into Egypt and then into Gaza. But Rafah is also part of a broader security concern for the Egyptian government, because not only the Arab Spring is a vivid memory here, but also the power grab that followed it, where there is now a concern for Egypt that through the border to Gaza, there could be weapons and Islamists coming into Egypt and then disrupting domestic security. So on one side, it is also being said that there is a concern about weapons being smuggled into Gaza from Egypt, but we need to see that Egypt has a very, very strong interest in keeping the border closed. So in not smuggling weapons over into Gaza, but also not getting any weapons or people into Sinai. And this is something that complicates the situation even more, because Egypt has been taking a very strong stance on not opening the border to refugees from Gaza in any way, even though it has been asked to do so by the international community and by Israel especially multiple times, but it has strongly refused due to these broader security concerns of it not wanting the domestic security to be disrupted by Islamist fighters coming into the country, but also more broadly, it is afraid of a hot conflict between Egypt and Israel maybe happening if the Gazan population is pushed into Sinai. This is a theory that has been around, and we also see this broader concern unfold. So this is Egypt's situation, just to give you an overview of it. We could talk about this for a long, long time. But this makes it very, very important in the negotiation process, because it holds leverage on Israel and on the international community because of the control of the Rafah border. It can impact the humanitarian situation in Gaza and has a broad network also of contacts that make it valuable in the process. So Egypt is, apart from Qatar, is one of the most important regional actors for the process of negotiation, and is not aligned with the actor that we are trying to take the power from, if you know what I'm talking about. It is not only important in the negotiations, but also in a post-war scenario. There have been some calls on Egypt maybe taking over governance in Gaza after the war, like they had done before 1967. But Egypt strongly refuses to do so because of something I mentioned before, because it has to balance its domestic situation and it doesn't have the oxygen to take on any responsibility that is not within its borders, for one. And for two, because it doesn't want the Gazan population to come outside of Gaza. So Sisi is really walking a tightrope here. He has to balance domestic demands and tensions and foreign policy interests. So we vaguely can tell that Egypt will be important in a post-war negotiation, but as long as we don't resolve the Rafah issue and the population movement issue, it's going to be very hard to get any concessions from them. I hope this has been a an overview that you can work with.
Thank you, Chantal. You actually explained this very clearly. Thank you so much for your contribution. Before we move on, I would like to ask Michele if you would like to add something. Just to give you some context, Michele studied in Tel Aviv for his master's degree, and he also spent months in the West Bank for his dissertation. So I'm sure he has many insights on this situation. So Michele, on to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, everyone. I absolutely second everything which has been said. Thank you to each and every one of our guests and speakers. Big premise. Obviously, it's fairly easy for me, somewhat arrogant, to sit hundreds, thousands of kilometers away, in my comfortable home, sentencing. Right. So, and telling other people in another part of the world how to live or what should they be doing. So I obviously try to stay clear of that. And I want to make this clear that everything that I'm going to say is to be taken with a big grain of salt. This is my perspective. And in addition to that, everybody's very welcome to differ. Right. So this is what I have seen. It's not the truth. It's not the gospel. Right. And so everybody's more than encouraged to make up with his or her own mind. I'm just trying to contribute. Right. So hopefully that this sticks with us. Now, I'm going to try not to be overly academic, but I do want to touch upon two things that even at the Defense Academy, we absolutely zoom in on quite enough, right? So the first thing is strategic culture. And I'm not going to be, don't worry, I'm not going to waste your time and try to define it and walk you through the debates. But essentially, strategic culture is about looking or skimming through a country and trying to appreciate its culture and trying to see through its culture how the latter does strategy and eventually policy. This, as you can imagine, bears big debate, because how can we generalize as for culture? What is culture? What about history? What about the people? As Omri was saying, people change. Israel now will be absolutely different than Israel in 10 years. So we have to, keep these aspects fairly anchored. Nevertheless, we can also go back and reflect upon seemingly constant variance, right? So that they remain constant. Take a look at the United Kingdom, for instance. Apologies for drifting away, but this actually underpins the point. Britain has arguably been doing 3 or 4 things for centuries. One of them, for instance, is making sure that no continental power would dominate mainland Europe, right? That has started since the Middle Ages. So why am I saying this? Because particularly on the Palestinian side, and I'm talking about like first-hand experience, interaction with officers, with NGOs, and even right now at the Defense Academy, when I have the privilege, the utmost privilege to interact with Saudis, Jordanian, Egyptian, and in general, all right, so Gulf state officers, they have absolutely no idea what Israel really thinks. Do I? Well, yes and no, right? So, and Omri can confirm this. But being a student and working elbow to elbow with pretty top-notch members from the Israeli intelligence security community, well, at least the basics are just unknown to the other side. And for instance, this is the so-called siege mentality. Everybody's against us. no matter what we do, everybody will always hate us Jews, because we are responsible for all evil in the world. And therefore, we have to retaliate as much as possible. That deterrence is our only way, because we cannot win big wars, essentially. Now, obviously, the 7th of October attacks have arguably broken this deterrence cycle, but this is one of the main pillars of Israeli strategic thinking, or at least has been, so far. And so this is why, or one of the main reasons why, Iran scares the hell out of many Israelis. But this is unknown in the Palestinian territories, for instance, or in Saudi. Or so I told you, when I have these conversations with even very top-notch officers, right? So who have even ministerial aspirations, they just, wow, I didn't know about this. I didn't know that that this is their vision of the world. And so in this way, cultural strategy thinking may absolutely come into play. The second aspect that I would like to talk about before moving to my conclusion, and apologies for the for the noise, but this is just the time of the day, so just apologies for that. Just ignore this. Is that emotions matter. We can be as rational as possible, as cold-blooded as possible, but at the end of the day, perception, emotions, symbols, and what we want to really believe in matter more than any academic, than any strategic, than any analytical analysis. It's the Middle East, stupid. I've been hearing, right? So just like a parrot, over and over and over. And the first time I did show up in the West Bank, many parts of the Palestinian territories, I lived in Bethlehem, Ramallah, Jericho. I went to Nablus, Tulkram, Jenin, blah, 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 right? And I didn't really understand it, like for many, many, many years. But then it just hit me. And I can absolutely see this in the modern conflict right now. Honor, just like in southern Italy, honor above everything. Family above everything. Let's call it distortions of religion above everything, right? So on both sides, in certain instances, and particularly when I was surveying, quantitatively speaking, the Palestinian territories, visions of history above all. The Jews stole our land, period, full stop. There's no reason to further the discussion. They are committing genocide, period. No other reason to further the discussion. They are carrying out apartheid, full stop. No other reason to further the discussion. They are inhuman, full stop. Obviously, we can absolutely be having the same conversation in some parts of Israel, right? So please, do not get me wrong. But when I was living over there, I sensed this. And I'm going to conclude on this thing. And a major appreciation, again, with the utmost respect and humility. I'm nobody to tell the Palestinians how to think. But if I were to humbly try to contribute to, I'm not going to call it like a better future, because that is also pretentious, but just offer my 2 cents, it would be a deeper understanding of Israeli strategic culture, an appreciation of the siege mentality. I'm sure that Omri and Magen will agree with me that you're born with the idea that people hate you. And why shouldn't you? Even your own celebrations are about people trying to kill you. You survive and then you eat, right? Right, Omri? Right. So, apologies for butchering and brutally paraphrasing all the sacred Jewish holidays. But you did get that feeling. And even as a foreigner, once I was asked whilst in Israel, why do you like us? Well, why should I like you? I responded. And this other person on the other hand, very intelligently, kind of obnoxiously, but very intelligently said, well, 60 years ago, you put us in ovens. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Right. So an appreciation of the Jewish past, connection to the land, and everything that happened would be very warranted in crafting any future agreement. So strategic culture, right? But the other thing, an appreciation of emotions, your emotions, not just the Israeli emotions, your emotions, right? So this is really, really important. And as a researcher of terrorism, radicalization, but coming from international security and international relations, this is big because we do not study emotions. Why? Because emotions cannot be measured. Because emotions can be fabricated, because emotions can be misunderstood and be blown out of proportion. But at the end of the day, isn't it what terrorism does? Right? So just blowing something out of proportion. Isn't it what conspiracy theories do? Well, the Jews control the world, right? For instance. And so, it's also about that, and something that we have to factor in. Very last point, apologies for blabbing, but as I always tell my wife, they actually pay me for this, right? So, but jokes aside, the Palestinians. So when I was at Stanford, let me share with you this anecdote. Again, in a very comfortable frat dormitory. So just keep this in mind. Given that we were not very popular with frat style type of life, again, yes, maybe Magen, you're right. It could be the very beginning, the hilarious beginning of a joke. A Christian and a Jew and a Palestinian, right? So we're discussing the big things because they were not being liked by women. Ha ha ha. But anyway, and I believe that this person would be the next Palestinian leader bringing peace. I'm not gonna obviously name him. I did invite him, by the way, not even gotten a reply. I was fairly sad, not because he didn't want to come, but because I was reminiscent about all the conversations that we used to have whilst at Stanford. And I really thought that he was going to be the next Palestinian Nelson Mandela. Not because he's just deeply in love with peace or delusional or constantly drugged up, right? So he wasn't naive in any way, right? So he said, I don't like the Israelis, but put it there. We can build something together. Let's break the deterrence cycle. Let's break the siege mentality thing. Let's break the honor, right? So, and the very machistic type of thing that labels betrayal, everything that we do with the Palestinians, with the Israelis. Let's break this. Because if it is one thing that history shows, is that when Israel is offered peace, maybe reluctantly, but Israel does it. If Israel is forced to be faced to face and re-experience, re-evoking the tragic images that Magen was referring to on the 7th of October, re-evoking the German fascist Nazi Holocaust, well, never again means never again. And the Jews are here to stay, and we will always have war. So there is injustice. It's horrible, right? So on both sides, I've seen it even myself, like in the West Bank, when I went to Hebron, right? So which is, I don't know if you, Omri, or Magen have actually ever visited Hebron, right? So, and I spoke to a very interesting person, a settler, right? So who even said, if this place becomes Palestine one day, I will fake my way through this. I will pretend to convert to Islam. I will send my kids to the madrasa and still be an Orthodox Jew because this is our land, right? So pretty strong commentary. But the point being, recognizing where the other side is from, like is very, 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 very crucial looking forward, in my humble and yet again opinion. Very last thing, and then I will conclude. As I was saying, Israel is here to stay. They're not going anywhere, but so are the Palestinians, of course, right? And therefore, again, not just mutual recognition, but an appreciation of history. No line I really like your point, Omri. We have to be very honest with ourselves, but we cannot have just one side at least trying to be slightly more honest, which in my opinion remains the Israeli one, because of history, because of culture, because of democracy, call it whatever you want. And then one side in which the modern voices not only get marginalized, but they get literally trampled by fake modern voices, which still call for the eradication of the state of Israel. Because let us remind us, calling or saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is no peace. It does not call for peace. There is injustice. We have to fight this together, but at the same time, not recognizing. So the Palestinian side, again, with the utmost respect, but should be coming to terms with a number of very pivotal terms, such as Zionism. I'm not a Zionist, and therefore I cannot be an anti-Semitic. Well, I beg to differ, because if you believe in the presence, even a minor one, right? So of a Jewish presence in the region, at least half of you is Zionist. And quantitatively speaking, I know it was some years ago, but almost 90% of the Palestinians I have interviewed opposed the existence of Israel. And even the moderate Palestinian Authority, I did go to the schools, I did see the textbooks, and there's no mention of Israel. So occupation is another big topic, right? So, but it is referred to the 1948 occupation. So this is why I absolutely reiterate this point. A Palestinian Nelson Mandela looking forward, saying, "Okay, we hate you. You stole our land. You're bastards." But here it is. Here we go. I know it may sound very, very naive and incredibly easy for me, right? So not being a Palestinian and not having seen all the things that they have seen and experienced on a daily basis. So please excuse me, I do not want to offend anyone, but it's much for the Palestinian community.
Thank you very much, Michele. Thank you. And if any of you wants to add something, you can do it now. If not, I will just move on to the Q&A session. Omri, Chantal, Magen, would you like to add anything? Okay, so I will just invite the public to step in. If you want to add something, Shaheen, I see you are raising your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank each and every one of you. It was amazing to listen to your parts. My question is directed to Omri. When we talk about an internal peace, we should consider the externalities as well. And the fact is, one of the main supporters of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the region has been the Islamic Republic of Iran. And considering that even if today Israel manages to completely, which is almost impossible to do that completely, but let's say maximally eradicate Hamas, in 10 years, in 15 years, there will be another group that will be again supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So if it's a snake, tail of the snake might be in Gaza. The body of the snake is in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah, but the head of the snake is in Tehran. So what do you think will change? Do you think Israel will change its policy against the Islamic Republic? Do you think a military intervention is something that may help? Or do you believe that at some point there will be some mutual indirect understanding between the two states to stop the support? Because the way I see it for the Islamic Republic, it is essential, it is existential to continue supporting these terrorist groups because it is a part of its somehow military and defense doctrine. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheen. So I'll start with the end and I'll agree. Yes, it is Iran's military doctrine to destabilize the region and to do it through proxy organizations that it finances or trains, like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. And it's not just that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas operate somewhere in the Middle East; they operate against Israel. So it's even a bigger prize, and that is why I agree with you that Iran will not stop, even if Israel succeed in eradicating Hamas or whatever Israel has defined its goal for the war, which to be honest is not very likely to happen. I think that the goals will change as we move on, and Hamas will remain a force, not necessarily the ruling force, but will remain a force within the Palestinian territories, and specifically in Gaza. Now, what are Israel's options? So basically, Israel doesn't have the capability to overthrow the regime in Tehran, to completely annihilate the nuclear facilities across Iran, and you know better than anyone here how widespread they are, how deep under the ground they are, or to do any military action that would completely change the Iranian military doctrine or perspective on things as they are. What Israel can and should do is to target the exact channels through which Iran supports Hamas and the PAJ. If it's financial, to instinct that to make sure that sanctions are not only imposed, but are actually enforced, right? Because the Biden administration has lifted sanctions from some Iranian officials, and since the October 7 attack, has imposed sanctions on some Iranian officials, but these sanctions aren't always imposed. And Iranian money is flowing through the Middle East completely without any problem. So that's one thing that Israel must insist on, and it has to be through a larger regional, even global cooperation, because Israel can't do it alone. And it should be obvious. It should be obvious that it's in everyone's interest to stop financing terror organizations. And in this case, we're talking about Iranian financing Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. A shipment of weapons. As much as Israel targets the shipment of weapons, still weapons are being smuggled into Gaza. Chantal mentioned the border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, but there's also the tunnels between Egypt and the Gaza Strip that Hamas built there during the time that the border crossing was closed, for that reason. So there's been a lot of smuggling of weapons into the Gaza Strip. Again, Israel's capabilities are good, but are not enough to stop Iranian support to these Palestinian terror organizations. It has to be an international cooperation. If international cooperation of enforcing these policies and these actions will not take place, then it will continue to happen. Israel must prove, if it hasn't yet, to the world, to all the bodies, the important bodies such as the UN and the EU and obviously the United States and so on and so forth, that Iran has been training, arming, financing, and facilitating Hamas and the PIJ. And if it does prove, then it's a clear sign that the international community must take action against these Iranian actions. And it's a very difficult job, but it's more likely to happen than an Israeli strike against Iran that will make all of this stop. So an Israeli strike against Iran will achieve something, but will not achieve a complete disconnection or disconnecting between Iran and the PIJ and Hamas.
Thank you, Omri. Does anybody else want to ask something to our speakers? Okay. If there are no more questions, Omri, you were saying that it might be late for Magen. So
Magen has 3 beautiful children, so I will give him the pleasure of going to say good night to them.
So yes. So yes, Magen, if it's running late for you, we are already absolutely thankful for you taking the time to be here tonight. So no worries at all. We understand your duties. And
sure, thank you. Just to up until 2 months ago, I never used my Twitter, and I'm trying not to use it yet. But I have someone who's helping the family with our social media at the moment, and she's quite active. So if you want to know a little bit about what we're doing, you're welcome to follow me there. And my brother was being even more active than me in Israel, and that can be an option to kind of follow what we're doing. And if you're curious about some of the media and the events, and also feel free to send a message if there's something further you want to talk about.
Thank you so much, Magen. Can you just tell us again the name of the profile so that people can?
Yeah, let me.
I will definitely follow it. So I have a pen.
I'm writing it in the chat. So it's Magen _Inon.
Okay, thank you very much.
And yeah, that's a easy way to get across.
Thank you so much, Magen. Definitely, it's also a way to support what you're doing, which I think it's very important at the moment. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to stay in touch with you for the future.
Sure, guys. Bye. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Magen.
Thank you, Magen.
Bye. So, okay. Does anybody else want to ask any question? If not, I might have a last question for you, Omri, and then I think we can wrap it up and call it a night. So you were saying before that obviously people change over time, and you were saying that the Israeli society, the government in power now is not ready to envision a different future. I was just curious, what do you think will take for the Israeli society to change in that sense and to have a different government? It's perhaps a very complex question, but
yeah, yeah, it is complex, but it's a good question. So I think that what would cause change within Israeli society is I refer back to what Magen said. It has to be people to people, a sort of a communication, because at the moment what we have is a top-down sort of like steering things and divide and rule policies, and communication that doesn't help Israeli society. Now, this is the leadership at the moment. Let's say that we have an alternative leadership in a year or 2 years' time. It's not going to change much in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict directly. But what can happen in the meantime, and what will hopefully happen after the leadership changes, is that people will actually communicate with each other on a less hostile basis. Because right now the divisions are massive. between right and left, between religious and secular, between Sephardic and Ashkenazi, between Arab Israelis and between Jews in Israel. And again, that is far from sustainable. One of my fears are that while the divisions are so big, Israel will get into a state of, it's a big term, but I'll use it for lack of a better term, a civil war. That actually there will be clashes between Israelis, between different groups within Israel. And that is not some sort of doomsday kind of theory. It's on our doorstep. It's a very, very volatile situation at the moment. If people can communicate with one another across political divides and across beliefs and religions and so on and so forth, then I believe Israel will move towards a better future. Now, I said that it won't, like, let's say an alternative government won't directly impact Israeli-Palestinian relations, but indirectly, I think people will start to understand, look, we first need to be okay with ourselves, amongst ourselves, and once we reach that point or advance towards that point, maybe we can also be okay with the other, and the other is the Palestinians. It is, you know, as Michele said earlier, I hope I'm not being too naive, but I think that trends and dynamics do matter, and personalities do matter. So if it's emotions, if it's beliefs, if it's notions such as honor or such as family, they can be there's a place in the middle to meet, both within Israel and between Israelis and Palestinians. But as long as the government keeps trickling down hatred and divisions, it's much less likely to happen. Once the leadership stops trickling down these negative emotions, then it is more likely that Israelis within themselves will be in peace, and then therefore it is more likely that Israelis and Palestinians will be in peace.
Thank you very much, Omri. Okay, I think we can end the event, but I would like just to, first of all, to thank all of you for participating, for all the insights, Chantal, Omri, Michele, and Magen, who left just now. And to wrap it up, I just would like to associate to what Michele said, that obviously it does feel a bit uncomfortable, perhaps, to think that we are discussing these events while we are sitting in our homes, all of us, safe in our comfort. But at the same time, this is a way to have this is a genuine intention to learn from each other and to enrich our perspective. And I think we all achieved that tonight. We got some very precious insights from the need to understand each other's mentality, the siege mentality, the honor mentality, to understand each other's strategic culture, the idea that the Palestinian would need their own Mandela. And also, of course, we learned about Magen's work, which is also very important. So I think we all learned from this. And so I just want to thank you all for participating. I hope you had the same experience as I did. I'm honored to be here tonight. And Michele, would you like to add something?
No, thank you. Thank you, Carlotta, for organizing this. Thank you to Omri, Chantal, and everybody who has come from Israel, all over Europe, and also to our Muslim friends and all the friends of ITSS. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. And by the way, to those of you who are going to come to Verona, I will see you in a few days. But thank you again, Carlotta, and have everyone a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carlotta and Michele.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.